It's been a while since we've covered a mixtape, hasn't it? Today, we're going to cover the first Ogrish collection mixtape out of the 6 Ogrish mixtapes to exist. Now some, if not most of you, may remember Ogrish. It was a shock site that covered and uploaded videos of accidents, war and executions. It would redirect to LiveLeak in 2006 when LiveLeak was registered as a domain. This was made by the same team who made Ogrish, which basically made Ogrish shut down in effect on the day. Since 2021, after LiveLeak's shutdown, this now redirects to a site called ItemFix, in which, looking at it at the moment, just looks like your average everyday video uploading platform. There doesn't seem to be anything overly gory or violent residing on that website. Now it just so happens that somebody went ahead and made 6 big compilations of videos that used to be on Ogrish. So yeah, we're gonna get straight into it, I guess. So the starting clips are just completely silent. What we're shown at the very start are 2 airborne planes which just sort of fall out of the sky. We're then shown a man with 2 faces on his head. The second face is at the side of his main face, I guess you can call it, topped off with hair and everything like that. It's very, very odd. You then have a clip from Chelyabinsk in Russia, where an old Russian granny is hit by a car. She ends up being fine and just sort of walks it off. We're also shown another old lady who's also hit by a car and just sort of also walks it off. I'm pretty sure old babushkas are just indestructible, to be honest. We're also shown an absolutely horrifying clip of some mountain climbers in what I believe is somewhere in South America. I mean, the news reporter is speaking Spanish, this is all I have to go on. It shows these mountain climbers who are basically unclipped from their harness, I guess, in which the 2 of them basically tumble down the mountain. You've then got a marketplace that looks like it's being bombed. Now the video quality is that of about 2 pixels, which some would call fortunate, as there's quite a lot of dead bodies on this street and people clearly in a state of distress. Now I'm not sure whether this is related, but soon after we see a close-up video of a leg that looks like it's been blown up by a bomb. It's basically the amputation of this leg up close, so you see absolutely everything. And it turns out that the guy who's having his leg amputated in this clip was actually damaged by a mine explosion. We then have some snakes. So this one snake is basically being fed live rabbits, in which the snake just sort of pounces on these rabbits and eats them alive. We've then got some sheep on a farm. The sheep are clearly being abused and mistreated. There are also cows being hung next to some sort of pool area. There's a big pool, and next to this pool there's a large mound of dead cattle and dead cows. You also get a conveyor belt of pigs basically being, again, hung upside down and whisked around this factory on a conveyor belt like thing. And if you've ever heard the squeal of a pig before in pain or in or an uncomfortable pig basically, then you can only imagine the sounds that are being made by the hundreds and hundreds of pigs within this clip. Chickens also make an appearance, in which they're basically being sorted from a cage and then hung onto some sort of coat hook, coat hanger on the wall. They're also lined up in a conveyor belt style sort of situation, and these chickens are all beheaded. You've then got a news reporter lady who's basically sat on the back of a truck. Now you hear a massive bang in the process and this woman fall off the back of the truck, and I had to watch this a couple of times because it really confused me as to what was going on. But what basically happened was a motorbike came out of the back of this truck. This was basically a motorbike event, and she was sat on the back of a truck, not expecting this man on a motorbike to come out of the back of the truck, and she's basically hit by this motorbike. It's unclear whether she sustained injuries or not, because the clip basically cuts off after that point. It's been a while since we've seen this kind of next clip, but it's basically a clip of somebody's arm who's close up to a camera, in which they start cutting themselves in the arm with a razor blade, and they're just sort of cutting into their arm over and over again in quick succession. Another similar clip comes up in which somebody basically jabs a knife into a guy's arm and then slices the knife down while it's in his arm, in which you basically see this wound just sort of open up slowly and start to bleed. You then have a video of a dead, cut open deer, I think, laid out on what looks like a very large canvas. It turns out that one, it's actually a bison or an ox, and two, people are actually getting inside of this carcass and are closing themselves in it. For some reason it looks like a very weird art exhibition, with people taking pictures of it and whatnot. And some people actually sort of begin to fasten the stomach of this bison or ox closed with the guy inside it. Again, it's another one of those incredibly odd clips. So next up we've got this autopsy. It's basically a dead woman on a table. They start by removing the skin from her breast area, and then they go on to cut open her entire front area, revealing everything inside. And they're basically removing the insides of this dead woman. You know, they're just doing the job, really. It's nothing more than an autopsy. And there's also this group of, I suppose, trainees, and they're all just examining these body parts. Next up, what we have is what I believe to be the back of somebody's head. I couldn't quite work it out, but it looks like the operation and the removal of a gigantic tumour. It turns out it isn't, it's just a head autopsy, and the head skin has basically been pulled down, so it makes the head look bigger and tumour-like. There's then footage of a corpse being wheeled out of a morgue and some doctors examining a brain. It then switches to the body of an unborn baby, basically a fetus, with some death metal music in the background. So next up we've got a UFC fight, in which one of the fighters basically headbutts the referee, and the referee apparently goes down, well, he does go down, and apparently he stops breathing for about 10 seconds. Now the fighter did actually get charged for this, and he was only put in jail for 30 days, which really isn't enough considering the referee apparently had everlasting effects. You've then got a baby with a huge tumour between its legs. You've then got a guy who is kicked in the balls, fully clothed by a lovely lady wearing stilettos, obviously. Now I did laugh at this because the sounds that he makes are not those of pleasure. You've then got what seems to be a very old clip of somebody commandeering a hot air balloon. Now they end up getting way too close to a tower, in which the balloon unhooks from the basket, and you can probably only guess where that goes. Now a bunch of people run towards it, and we're then shown the aftermath. It's not great. Now this group of people basically lay the American flag over the body and the basket for some reason. You've then got a guy who's dressed in a karate outfit. You've got a woman sat next to him on a chair, and in between these two human beings is a gigantic bear. And the bear gets a little bit riled up and attacks the woman. You've then got that one guy with the gigantic balls, which we've seen about 3 times before. There's also a dead person lying in the middle of the road with their face literally off. Now there's a huge pool of blood above him, in which people are basically just going hands deep into this pool of blood, just picking out parts of the face, I suppose. And some of these people aren't even wearing gloves. They're just going in bare hand, like that, picking out pieces of nose and mouth and eyes and brain matter. You've then got an ambulance that accidentally hits somebody on a bike, in which in a comedy way, the ambulance basically backs up and picks up the guy that it just hit. You've then got a fatal bike crash in which a guy's claret is just spread absolutely everywhere. And I know for sure that this is a clip that we've seen before in Faces of Gore, as it's got that edgy, orchestral, creepy music that we've seen in this Mondo series before. They're basically trying to push this guy's guts back into his body. We've then got a policeman who's confronting 2 men on a bike, in which the 2 men try and flee, resulting in a policeman letting his gun go off in the face of one of the bikers. Now at first I thought that this was actually by accident. However, we're shown the clip in slow motion about 3 more times, and it did actually look like he raised his gun and meant to shoot the man in the face. So next up we've got some young lads who look like they're about to do a bike stunt. This guy basically jumps off the top of some stairs on his bike and basically just face palms into the pavement. There's then a giant flock of birds eating an animal corpse, in which this corpse is basically rigged with bombs and explodes, blowing up a ton of birds in the process. We've then got a street covered in dead bodies, injured people, and blood. There's also some random death metal music in the background with random male screaming vocals as well. Next we've got a very, very badly burnt body. The body is completely charred black, with bits and pieces of the body missing, or bits and pieces of flesh stripped from the bone, in which the body is wrapped in a tarp. There's also this video which I can just show you.
It's not a cop, is it? It's some baby wondering what's going on. That was the first shot if I've ever seen one.
You then cut to even more faces of gore death scenes, in which it becomes apparent that the creator of this mixtape just really loved putting these awful 90s faces of gore scenes with heavy death metal music in the background. You've then got what looks like a load of protesting going on a street. There's police there, and they're basically just slapping the shit out of people, including one young woman who's dragged across a road screaming. We then have, in black and white, some soldiers shooting people. One of them's drowning somebody. Some of the people are being punched, kicked and whipped. There's also a video of a woman who's holding up a blown up baby at one point. This could possibly be something from the Vietnamese War, but I'm unsure. Next up is the suicide of R. Bud Dwyer, a politician who shot himself on live TV. Now, I do go really in depth into it on this video here, but I'll just explain what happened real quick in this clip. Now, Bud is given a package during this speech, which basically holds a revolver. He tells people not to panic or leave the room, and then holds the revolver up to his mouth, shooting himself in the face and dying. Now, this is a live TV broadcast, and they don't cut it off. They leave his bleeding face running on live TV for more than 30 seconds to a minute. Then have somebody grooming a cow, I think, and it turns out that he isn't actually grooming this cow. He lifts up a very big sword and chops its head off. Now, a crowd also watches as its body twitches violently. You then have a guy being gored, presumably to death, by a bull, and this is during one of those Pamplonas, or a bull chasing contest. There's also a video of two bulls slamming into each other at full speed. But yeah, for the most part, the next section's basically 4 or 5 short bull goring videos. We then have a video of rabbits in a cage, and this seems to be another video from that same slaughterhouse that we saw at the beginning of the video. Again, these rabbits are hung on top of a coat rack or a rail, the heads are chopped off and the rabbit is skinned. There's then a fireman and a guy falling off of the second story window of a building, and there's also a rally car that can't stop. It ends up grinding along a wall and hitting a cameraman. Now, luckily the rally driver and the cameraman were both okay and only suffered minor injuries. You then have a lady conducting an interview in which a random man comes up behind her and just sort of knocks her out. You've then got a lady with her boobies out eating maggots off of a corpse's skull. You've got someone jumping off of a very large building on fire. You've then got a police chase in which the guy who's being chased gets out of his car and starts running. He runs from the police, and when I say runs, I mean like Usain Bolt style sprint. He's eventually apprehended about a minute later and taken down. There's also a car crash aftermath in which it's basically just a young boy's face covered in blood. You then have another rally car crash, except this one seems to be a little bit more fatal. The car hits the wall and rolls several times, seemingly crushing the car in the process. There's also this car about to jump this ramp. You can only imagine how that goes. You also have an apparent priest who's taken out by a firing squad. There's also the Church Clay beheading video. Again, we've covered this, but in short, it's basically a soldier who has his head cut off. The soldier is unknown, and the sounds that he makes are completely disturbing. If you want more info about this video, go ahead and check that one out. You then have a couple of videos of cars and tanks being blown up, in which there's that group of people doing the Allahu stuff. You've then got more autopsy stuff, followed by a video of a woman hanging from the ceiling of her house. Her neck is incredibly lengthy, like she's been hanging there for a while. She's cut down and it appears that her body is very stiff, almost like a mannequin, and it looks like rigor mortis had already set in ages before she was cut down. You've then got some sort of voodoo thing. It looks like a witch doctor who basically cuts the head off of a chicken and lets it bleed onto a fire, and the headless chicken is basically running around like a headless chicken. You then have a very short clip of a man holding onto his cut off hand. There's then a cockfighting event. There's this big black cock versus a slightly smaller white cock. Chickens, not penises, by the way. And the black cock wins. You've then got this lovely lady who we've seen before. She basically chops a chicken's head off and the body of the chicken just goes completely mental. Alright, we're back for round 2. We then have footage from the Columbine massacre, which was where Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold killed 13 people and injured 24. You've then got a cop who triggers a shotgun, I think, in which it basically blows off or burns his hand quite badly. There's also a car that slams full speed into a police officer standing next to their car. You've also got a video of a giant tumour being pulled out of a woman's vagina, and then some people taking pictures of a dead body for about 2 minutes straight. There's then a furnace being lit up, in which you quickly realise that it's basically the incineration of a body. There's then somebody being literally crucified, like nails in the hands and the feet type of crucified. There's also more faces of gore stuff. It's the same old song and dance we've seen throughout most of this mixtape already. You've also got, and it's got to be fake, there's a guy who's tied up, arms and legs are tied up. He's gagged and blindfolded, I believe, in which his penis is then chopped off. It looks very, very fake. It's basically chopped off with a pair of pliers. It looks like some kind of underground horror movie. You also get a clip of a little small fetus. You then have some black and white footage. Now, this seems to be black and white footage of World War II. It looks like footage of the Germans burying dead Jewish people in mass graves. And over the top of this footage, it sounds like it's some kind of possibly Hitler speech. I mean, it's definitely German, but I think it may be a Hitler speech. There's then a clip from Africa in which wild animals are used to clear minefields. So there's a very, very large group of animals running across this field. Some are blown up, some aren't. There's one particular deer which gets blown up and it's thrown several feet into the air, in which there's a orchestral background music playing in the background as it goes up in the air in slow motion. And then there's a short compilation of parts of fetuses and dead babies, and I must say I did physically feel quite sick during this clip. It did make me retch. It's quite awful. Basically looks like a compilation of babies and fetuses that have come out of somebody. There's like half of babies' heads. One of the babies' bodies is just a torso with legs and a rib cage poking out of the top of this torso. One is just a skull with melting flesh. There's half of a baby's head in a pickle jar. as well as a little eyeball inside of a mound of flesh. There's also a full dead baby in a white bucket. It just goes on, and it's extremely horrific to watch. Some of the bodies are quite mummified, and there's just pieces of arms and legs inside mounds of flesh as well. And a lot of these aren't just like fetuses, like little aborted fetuses. Some of them are fully grown, almost ready to be, if not already born, bodies of babies. So you've then got a man who pulls down his pants, and his penis is just loaded with lots and lots of piercings. He takes the big one out of the top of his penis and puts his finger through his holy penis. Not like Jesus' holy penis, like an actual hole in his penis. Unfortunately, we've got cock and ball torture now, such as a guy hammering his balls into a plank of wood. His penis is completely gone. There's also a guy who puts a sharp metal rod into his penis and moves it in and out. You've then got a bunch of dead dolphins or whales washed up on a beach with people stabbing them with harpoons. You've then got more operation stuff with Dutch subtitles. You also have a few cows that have their necks sliced, in which the blood basically runs into buckets. Some people also collect this blood in little red cups and drink it. There's also a crushed body coming down an elevator shaft. It's another Faces of Gore video. There's also more police brutality and a terrorist beheading with a katana. It's always a katana. There's also a dead man who's placed in a bathtub in the middle of a field. There's also that one clip we've seen before where there's some soldiers with two prisoners, I imagine, and these soldiers are saying that they're not going to kill any of these men, but they end up killing them. They end up shooting them. We also get that one clip of that blindfolded man that we see in literally everything. What I didn't know about this clip before was that this man actually takes a shot to the face with a gun, as well as 3 shots to the body, and still manages to survive. We then have an electric chair execution. When this man is electrocuted, foam runs out of his mouth and his eyes start bleeding, in which the blood runs down his face. We also have a video of somebody tied to a tree on fire. There's also this interview, as well as the guy whose throat is cut on some kind of stage that looks like it's taking place on a basketball court. Now, I do believe that this is actually accidental, as paramedics come running towards him. And by the end of this video, I'll probably win a trophy for the amount of times somebody has said autopsy in a video. But yes, there is more autopsy footage. We also have a very laggy clip of a guy who basically has his hand up to the camera. He then proceeds to basically chop one of his fingers off with a razor blade. Keeping on the subject of hands, another guy puts a large metal pin through his thumb. You also have a guy who has basically lost all his fingers, presumably in an accident in which some doctors are changing these very, very bloody bandages to a new set of bandages. There's then this blonde lady who is right up close to the camera, mouth to the camera, gaping hole, like her mouth is huge. I'm pretty sure she just picks up her pet goldfish and launches it into her mouth. There's then a guy trapped in a machine, and this is accompanied by even more heavy metal music over the top of the clip. Yet again, it's more banned in America, Faces of Gore stuff. There's also somebody jumping off of a building and this weird plane thing. There's also a video of a body floating down a river, shaped like a frog, like frog's legs. There's also 9/11 Twin Towers footage with people jumping out of the building with the song Free Falling in the background. We've then got CCTV footage taken from about 4 o'clock in the morning in which an argument is taking place. Now the man in the argument is shot, in which he then falls onto the ground screaming until he eventually passes away. We then see a clip of somebody being buried in a coffin. Now the group of people who are holding the coffin actually slip while lowering him into a grave, in which they fall down. The coffin unfortunately opens, revealing the body of the person inside. I can imagine that being quite scarring to any family members who were attending that funeral. You also have a clip of a goat who's about to be killed. It's held down and the screams of the goat sound like that of a man, like a human man. Now one of the men holding this goat down actually puts his hand over the mouth and the nose of this goat, in which it begins to let out this sort of muffled screech. Now its throat is then cut, and obviously they cut through the voice box of this goat, so as they cut through it, the screams of this goat just get more guttural and violent as he's cutting through this goat's throat. And this isn't the only clip like this. Straight after, there's a clip with another goat being beheaded, except this one's not making much sound, but you can hear the knife cutting through bone. We also have this old lady who I believed at first to be dead. She has a needle rammed into the side of her eyeball, in which it's injected with fluid. I can confirm that she wasn't alive, and that this is actually a video of a corpse preparation. He's basically injecting fluid into her eyes to make her eyes look probably more alive for a funeral, and he's also sewing up her mouth so her mouth is closed and not hanging open during the funeral. I suppose it's just a funeral director or somebody who works in a for a funeral company doing the job, basically. There's another brutal bike crash. Again, faces of gore. There's also a parachute accident, and a guy who's about to be hung is hanged. Basically, this guy is flailing about, trying to resist his execution. We also have a group of people in a cave. One of them is a witch doctor, and he's basically massaging the body of another man. Obviously, it gets a little bit weird, and he ends up chopping the finger off one of this guy's hands with a makeshift tool made to look like a knife. He ends up wrapping this hand up in like a makeshift bandage of tape and hay. We also have a video of a corpse lying on a table in what I can only presume is a morgue, in which there's a man performing what I can only presume is an autopsy with a giant saw. He's basically sawing the top of this person's skull off, presumably to get to the brain. We also have a man somewhere in Africa who's lying down and having hooks hooked into his back. Now I presume that this is for punishment, but it could be for some kind of festival or ritual. and this is done with the song Links zwei drei vier by Rammstein playing in the background. Now they lift this guy up and they basically start swinging him like he's on some kind of child's swing. We also see a bit of rioting, you know, your typical cars being flipped over, police hitting people and vice versa, as well as things being set on fire. There's also a couple of horse racing accidents, in which one of them includes a show jumper, jumping over a wall. Now the horse falls forward and the jockey basically falls in front of the horse. So the jockey lands first and the horse basically falls on top of him. And to put it into a perspective of how painful this would be, the average horse actually weighs around 500 to 600 kilos. There's also that very popular clip of a jockey during a horse race where he falls off of the horse and the horse proceeds to drag him behind for a very large portion of the race. There's also some kind of underground horror movie-esque movie in which a guy washes his hands. But that's not all, obviously. We're taken over to a dead morgue table where a woman is lying. Dead, obviously. Now this guy has a knife and is running the knife along the woman's body and breasts. And this is done in a sexual manner. He then stabs her over and over. His hand then moves towards his penis. He masturbates to the corpse, feeling its bloodied breasts, and he orgasms quite clearly. But that's not all. He then puts on a new pair of gloves, covering his fingers with Vaseline or lube. He presses record on a camera and proceeds to remove his pants. He then gets onto the corpse in a missionary position, and for like a whole minute he's basically going to town on this corpse, moaning loudly, and eventually finishing inside this corpse. But remember, this video wasn't real. It is literally from a movie. Okay, I'll just put that out there real quick. We then have this video of an Arab guy who's basically having a huge wooden stake pushed up his bumhole, in which he's then lifted up and left to hang. You also have this funny clip. There's then this UFC fight in which the fighter on the right, his leg basically breaks into like two sections. It's pretty horrible. There's also this, it's either a woman or a child, and they're basically being slapped about next to a garage. There's also this guy holding a toddler in his arms, telling police to get back. Now one of the policemen actually shoots him in the face. They both fall down, but fortunately the child in the video was unharmed. We also have that starting clip from Banned in America. You know, that one where there's basically a guy holding up the freeway and his truck is on fire in the middle of the freeway. He basically removes his pants, stands on the edge of the bridge as if he's about to jump off, changes his mind, gets down, goes to the back of his truck, picks out a shotgun, and goes back into the middle of the freeway and then shoots himself in the head. We've also got a bit of a shoot off. There are basically cops surrounding this house. They throw some smoke into this house, in which a guy basically comes out, in which they just blast him completely. And there's also what looks like a shark attack. Basically a guy is in the water and he's thrashing about. There's people screaming around him, and he's basically pulled back onto this boat and covered in blood. There's also a man sat in the middle of a road with his foot hanging off by a thread. Now something's a little bit suspicious in this clip, as there's a soldier who basically covers the camera, trying to hide the camera's view of this guy, in which they then pick him up, put him in an ambulance, then cart him off. There's also a guy who gets full on attacked by tigers while taking pictures of wildlife, and I'm pretty sure that his kids and wife are in the back of a car nearby as well. You also have an Indian group of men who are sat next to a whole lion. The lion flips, grabbing one of the men, and it basically ends up being a tug of war between the three men and the lion. There's also a woman who basically collapses on live TV on top of some set, which basically falls on top of her. And weirdly enough, the news reporters, there's two of them near her, they just sort of sat there with no sense of urgency or anything. We also have a cameraman filming some kind of turf war, in which it looks like he's grazed in the side of the face by some incoming bullets. You then also have what looks like a badly infected and chopped off a stump of a leg being wrapped in bandage. There's also somebody's whole ass eyeball being pulled out, and this is all up close. Now this same person has some of their insides pulled out as well, and this clip is a little weird because when they stop, the body is still weirdly intact. There's then another group of dead bodies, and yet another Rammstein song. This is the Hier kommt die Sonne by Rammstein. There's also this bicycle accident, and to be honest, you do really hit a point in this mixtape where everything just sort of clashes into one. It all just becomes the same thing, and at this point you begin to sound like a broken record. There's also this protest where this guy seems to get run over by a tank. We also get a complete and utter fuck up from a SWAT team, in which there's some people being held hostage. Now the SWAT team do start firing on these two robbers, I think they are, ultimately injuring two of the hostages instead. And there's also this really horrific scene, which again looks like it's from Faces of Gore or something similar, in which there are basically three children all dead and covered in blood. We also see a few protests and a man stood on a balcony next to some flags that read it's either Korean or Chinese writing, and he's basically stood on this balcony, and he's basically stood there holding a knife after cutting open his stomach. There's also another snake eating video. So there's this mouse, and it's basically stood at the end of a cage. Now this snake comes right up to this mouse, and the mouse just sort of stays there, and the mouse just sort of turns around just like, hello, I'm a mouse. Not in English obviously, because it's a mouse. And I'm just like, run, run somewhere. And then this snake just fully engulfs this mouse. There's also a couple of Evel Knievel wannabes who basically take a ramp jump, and obviously it goes wrong. There's also one of those, I believe it's an Islamic festival, where people basically put, metal rods into themselves, screwdrivers into themselves, knives into themselves, There's also black and white footage of some sailors and Nazis being shot in a firing squad execution, as well as a large group of sick people. We also have a man who's sat on a hill. He's basically shot. And apparently this video is from the 22nd of October 1996. And this man basically seems to be surrounded by 3 people, 2 of them with weapons. One of them is holding a camera filming the event. Now this guy, after being shot, seems to be stabbed with a long pointy object. He's laid down on the ground and his coat is taken off, all while he's still very much alive. His ear is first chopped off and then he's beheaded. You then see a video of one of those fairground swings, and honestly this is one of my worst nightmares. The chairs basically all fall down, which would be fine as they are floor level. However, the top of the ride also falls down, basically crushing a ton of people who have fallen off the swings. We also have more black and white footage of people basically flamethrowering a shit ton of bunkers, and some AC-130 footage. We then finish off this whole mixtape with a crashing car, and that is the Ogrish collection volume 1. Thank fuck it's over. So let's be honest here, it wasn't great at all. I mean, mixtapes aren't great in general, obviously, but in the grand scheme of things, we may have just rewatched and re-talked about Faces of Gore. A lot of it I have missed out because a lot of it was just clips taken from things like Faces of Gore, Traces of Death, Faces of Death, you name it. And a lot of it was really just the same stuff. But I suppose that's the thing with any old mixtape that people make. You are just going to get repeat clips quite a lot. So that's another mixtape debunked. Hope you guys enjoyed listening to it. I don't know what there is to enjoy, but yeah, that's another mixtape debunked and explained, so you guys don't have to see it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay safe, and I will see you in the next video.